from the far corners of the earth. So shall the multitude be joined together, and their power will be magnificent to behold.
The Microsoft Xbox was released 20 years ago this year, and though it's had its ups and downs, it has definitely left its mark on the gaming industry in that time. Released during the 6th generation of video game consoles, mainly competing with Sony's PlayStation 2 and Nintendo's GameCube, it was the first major console produced by an American company since the release of the Atari Jaguar in 1993. And despite me being a Sony fanboy back in the day, I was actually looking forward to the reveal of this system ever since I had heard that Microsoft was looking to enter the market. The console was announced in March of 2000, and soon after that I came across this image online, which was being touted as a prototype but not the final build of the Microsoft Xbox. Just take a look at that aluminum-bodied chassis with the giant X and the CD drive in the middle. This would have been an impressive console, and I would have loved to have had it. Unfortunately, this is what we got revealed instead. To tell you the truth, before I'd even seen a single frame that the console had rendered, I was immediately against the Xbox being a generic black box. Although I am a huge fan of the green dot in the center and the green menu scheme that the console would eventually have, I kind of found this system to be a bit bulky and less what a game console should be and more what you would get from a gaming PC, and a budget one at that. But maybe I was being a bit biased at the age of 15. Today I don't find the console design to be as bad as I remembered back in the day, but I also agree that the controller definitely needed a redesign, as the big Duke hamburger controller was not what I wanted to play with. And while I would drink the Kool-Aid, as it were, and buy a PlayStation 2, those who would adopt the Xbox would have a similar but different experience with gaming. With Microsoft becoming concerned that game consoles would begin to threaten the personal computer as an entertainment device for living rooms, they decided to design the Xbox to be not only a game console but also a multimedia entertainment center for your living room. Where Sony and Nintendo would design their systems around custom hardware, Microsoft would design their Xbox using standard personal computer components, including variations of Microsoft Windows and DirectX as its operating system to support games and playback. Microsoft would pack this machine with more powerful hardware compared to its rivals, featuring a 733 MHz Intel Pentium 3 processor, the same found in several powerful PCs of the time. They would also add in features such as a built-in hard disk for storage, as well as a built-in broadband Ethernet port for online and multiplayer gaming. They would also set the bar for what online gaming on a console should be with the release of Xbox Live, a fee-based online gaming system, a year after the console would launch. The Xbox would have a record-breaking launch in North America, selling 1.5 million units before the end of 2001. This was aided by the popularity of one of the system's launch titles, Halo Combat Evolved. The system would go on to sell a worldwide total of 24 million units, including 16 million in North America. However, Microsoft was unable to make a steady profit off of the console, which had a manufacturing price far more expensive than its retail price. Though 24 million units is nothing to balk at, Microsoft would end up losing over $4 billion over the life of the console. And with Sony's PlayStation 2 becoming the best-selling console of all time, competition was just way too stiff for this system. But it did establish Microsoft as a major player in the home video game console market, as Microsoft was able to outsell longtime game titans Sega and Nintendo. This led Microsoft to develop a worthy successor to the 360, followed by the Xbox One, and where we are at today with the Xbox Series X and S. But not to get too far ahead of ourselves, this video is about the original Xbox. Well, not necessarily the original Xbox. As you can see here in this video footage, my Xbox is having a common difficulty where the tray mechanism doesn't want to always pop open. And while this could be a relatively easy fix, I will have to save this for another video, because this original console is not the only option I have to play original Xbox titles. One of the perceived problems of the original Xbox was its lack of backwards compatible titles that their main competitor Sony would have, due to having released a console in the prior generation and including the ability to play almost all of those games on their second system. And it is perhaps for this reason why during the Xbox 360 generation, having backwards compatibility with original Xbox titles was a high priority. However, it was far from 100% backwards compatibility. And as Sony would eventually bow out of offering backwards compatibility on the PlayStation 3 due to its high cost, Microsoft would continue to invest in this even going into the Xbox One and the Xbox Series X console. It should be noted that backwards compatibility is actually not offered on the Xbox Series S due to the fact that it is missing a disk drive. But if you take one of the eligible games from almost 20 years ago on your original Xbox console and insert them into your Xbox Series X, it should run. And this is something that I find really astounding. I don't think there is any game developer ever in the history of video game consoles that had backwards compatibility over such a huge time frame. The catch, however, is that the list of compatible titles has been dwindled down over each generation. This could partially be due to the fact that several titles from the original console have been remastered or ported to future systems featuring updated graphics. Or some game publishers simply don't want their older titles available on current consoles for one reason or another. Maybe they feel like it would conflict with sales, or maybe they feel like the titles are way too dated to be enjoyed today. But after seeing how the backwards compatibility function works on the Xbox Series X, the answer could be a bit more simple than that. It appears that when you insert a game disc, the only time the disk drive fires up is just to check to see what game it is and if it's compatible, and then the disk drive will stop spinning, and you are prompted to download the entire game off of the Xbox store. Firing up games will lead to varied results. It looks like a lot of these games were ported to this system, rather than actually running the original version that would run on the Xbox. All of these titles seemed optimized in one way or another, and many featured upscaling, and a lot of them even rendered their graphics in a wider aspect ratio than was originally intended. So what is it like to play original Xbox games from almost 20 years ago on Xbox's newest console? Well, let's take a look. So the first thing I did in preparation of playing all of these titles is I had to make sure I had enough free space for each of these games to be downloaded onto my system. As my subscription to Game Pass has quickly filled up the internal drive on this system, I did invest in an external card to add an additional terabyte of storage space to this console. Even still, I did have to shuffle some things around and delete a couple of large-sized titles, just so I can make sure that I would be able to fit all of the games in here. Then I started inserting each disc one at a time so that it would prompt the download of each game to begin. I then let the Xbox do what it seemingly does best, suck all of the data off the internet that it possibly can. On my home internet connection that was capped at 100 megabits per second, at least while I was trying to download these titles, it took well over an hour or two to download every game that I put in here. I should note that I don't own every single backwards compatible title, so I'm only going to be trying the ones that I actually own, as well as titles that are offered off of Game Pass. Once I have my download list ready, I just let the console update and made sure that it wouldn't shut off because apparently mine doesn't like to update when it goes into standby. I'm sure there's a setting I could change, but just keeping the console from shutting off was good with me. Once all the downloads were complete, I decided to go ahead and fire up one of the games, and the first one I chose was Conker Live and Reloaded.
Well, there I am. Conker the King. King of all the land. Who'd have thought that?
Well, on first impression, it looks like Conker's Bad Fur Day, or Conker Live and Reloaded as it's known on the Xbox, is running at an upscaled resolution probably close to 960p. That appears to be the case with the majority of original Xbox titles as well. But if the game is specifically optimized for the Xbox One X and above, it can run up to 16 times the resolution at 4K. But anyway, this game was built from the ground up to be ported to the Xbox from the Nintendo 64. In fact, development started on this game the instant it was bought by Microsoft back in 2002. In terms of single-player mode, the gameplay and plot is identical to Conker's Bad Fur Day. There are varying differences that include different enemies and new weapons, like a baseball bat with a nail in it, which is actually specifically mentioned by Conker himself when he makes a fourth wall break talking to the player, and the game developers themselves not to make any changes because they just want the same game.
Weren't you meant to fall off here?
Yes. But the designer thought it wise to change the training level a bit. To fool the audience into thinking that the rest of the game would also be different. I'm afraid you'll have to try something else.
Well, lucky I brought this as well in.
Ouch.
He missed the designer. No more surprises, please.
The multiplayer mode in this game got a complete overhaul, specifically so that it could accommodate Xbox Live, as there was no online features when the N64 version was developed. Another difference that left me a bit puzzled was the fact that they decided to censor the game a bit more than the Nintendo version. In terms of how the game controls, I didn't really notice any input lag as I was playing it on my setup, and the game controls just as good as always. For reference, I decided to splice in some footage captured from an original Xbox that was outputting 480p over component cables, and it is being upscaled to 1080. When I was viewing these separately, I found it hard to tell the difference between the two. Now that I see them side by side, I can tell that the Xbox Series X version is a bit more sharp, as the graphics are being upscaled and presented at a higher resolution than on the original Xbox. Overall, I had a pretty good experience with it.
Let's see. That way? Or that way? That way smells a bit pooey. Let me see.
Next, I decided to try a game I have not played probably since this generation of consoles, and that is Star Wars Jedi Starfighter. Star Wars Jedi Starfighter initially came out in 2002 for both the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox. It was the sequel to the immensely popular Star Wars Starfighter, and in terms of plot, the game takes place just prior to the events of Attack of the Clones and during the Battle of Geonosis. In terms of gameplay, the player controls different starfighters from the Star Wars universe. Each mission revolves around protecting friendly ships and destroying enemy ships. Each mission also has one bonus and one hidden objective, which, when completed, unlocks bonus missions, videos, and starfighters. The campaign can be played in cooperative mode, where a second player controls either a ship or a turret depending on the mission. When this game was added to the backwards compatibility list for the Xbox 360, there were minor bugs noted that had slowdown during menu selections and transitions, as well as minor performance issues during cutscenes. When I was playing the game, I didn't notice any graphical glitches, and I had a pretty smooth experience, not noticing any slowdown or anything that would hinder my gameplay. And I'll tell you what, actually playing this game for the first time in many years, I got sucked into it all over again. I think it's a shame that this series died out after this entry. As for me, it offers a side of Star Wars that I think you seldomly get to experience, and that is basically kind of like a flight simulation game. In between the X-Wing vs. Starfighter series on PC and the Star Wars Squadron game that was just recently released, this was really my only option for playing this kind of game for many years. Now there was the Rogue Squadron series on GameCube, but that was a console I didn't have back in the day. And I think the main reason why this series died out is because almost all Star Wars games stopped at the end of the prequel trilogy. And that could be partially due to the fact that there were several video games released in such a small period of time, between 1999 and 2005, that maybe the market was getting a bit fatigued. Sadly, the only series that would get attention after all of these games was LEGO Star Wars, which is fine and all, but it was definitely not providing all the experiences I wanted out of a Star Wars game. Getting to play this game that I've played through back in the day, upscaled and running well on a modern console, is a particular thrill to me. I wish they would go back and do the original Star Wars Starfighter as well. If you haven't played it, I would give this one a shot.
Perfect target for force link.
But if you're looking for a different Star Wars game, this is probably the one you are looking for. Star Wars Battlefront was a huge success when it first released, and it was one of those killer games that would rule LAN parties during this time. And even though I never owned an Xbox back in the day, I spent countless hours playing this game at LAN parties where people would bring in their Xboxes and hook them up, and we would spend a countless amount of hours playing this game. I mean, the only thing that superseded it was Star Wars Battlefront 2. And having it backwards compatible on the Xbox Series X is a special treat. I got into this game all over again. I really like that the game is rendered in full widescreen. And even though this game does show a little bit of its age, especially when compared to modern first and third person shooters, this game does control very well, and I think it's something that everyone can still just pick up and play and have a good time playing it. And even though they've revived this series with those new entries, I still like coming back to these better. And I don't know if that's just because of my personal childhood experience, or if these games really are that much better than the new ones. You'll have to try them and find out for yourself. I've had people ask me which one should they get if they were just going to get one, and I don't know why you wouldn't get both, but to tell you the truth, I think I remember liking this one, the original, better than the second one, as I think I remember the maps from the second game being a bit darker, making it harder to see where you're at, and you can get lost on maps very easily. I didn't really have that issue with this first game, but that is coming from a veteran player. It is amazing what you remember and what you don't remember from a game you used to play all the time, but haven't played it over a few years. I had almost forgotten how much fun it was to slaughter some of the Gungans being a battle droid, and how sad it is when you're a battle droid sent in to slaughter Wookiees. Another game on this list that I found myself playing was Dead to Rights. Now this is a game that I kind of dismissed way back in the day as being like Namco's version of Grand Theft Auto, and I think that's partially true, but after playing it, I would say that this game actually matches more of a Max Payne style of game than anything else. In this game, you take the role of a police officer named Jack Slate and his K9 unit, Shadow, and the two of them fight crime in Grant City, which I guess would be kind of a combination of Chicago and Detroit, based on the crime rate in this game. After the tutorial of the game, you find out that your father has been murdered and you set out on revenge. But since so much of this game is linked to the story, I'm not going to give away too much here other than the intro. This game is also rendered at near full widescreen, and what's also refreshing is that the cutscenes have also been kind of cut to match the aspect ratio that the rest of the game is using. One of the game mechanics gamers of the early 2000s will notice is the use of bullet time, in which you can slow down time and make your shots more accurately since you are given more time to do so. I felt like this concept was done to death back in the day, but perhaps because this is my only option for playing a game of this type from this era, I personally found it a bit nostalgic. The game follows a lot of obvious cliches and some very awkward missions and cutscenes that were meant to make the game appeal to an older audience back in the day, but now those just kind of fall flat for me. When this game was released, it actually won GameSpot's 2002's Best Story on Xbox and Best Story on PlayStation 2 prizes. It also had a nomination for the Best Shooter on the GameCube, and I gotta tell you, the controls of this game is what kind of brings it in for me. If you leave the hokey plot elements aside, I think that this game does perform very well, and has tight controls, and if you're a fan of games like Max Payne back in the day, I would definitely recommend giving this a try, as I do feel this is part of a generation of games that just aren't made anymore. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, the choice will have to be up to you. Another game that's fun to go back to is Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. This game was an astonishing reboot for the series back in the day, as I had gotten really tired of the original Prince of Persia by then because it was ported to almost everything. But I don't think I have ever tired of this game. It does use a bullet time mechanic, as you're able to rewind time and redo areas or objectives that you are constantly struggling with, and I think it was done very well. Going back to it on the Xbox Series X, this is another thrill for me to go back and play a game that I used to play a lot back in the day, and up until its most recent remaster, there was really no way to play this game on a modern system. And while remasters are great, I always find myself going back and playing the originals.
No, that's not what happened. I jumped over.
Jade Empire is an action role-playing game that was developed by BioWare that I was initially unaware of until I got an Xbox console. I had some people online recommend this game to me because it was one of the Xbox exclusives that some people felt were really well done, but I had no idea why this game was recommended to me so often until I actually started playing it. This game is done in typical BioWare fanfare, with turn-based action role-playing battles, and a lot of talking head cutscenes that provide you with the story's exposition and hints on how to play the game. Those of you that are a fan of this style will definitely want to pick up this game, but I should note that that recommendation is only coming after a few hours of playing this game. It does remind me a little bit of their earlier work on the Baldur's Gate series, as well as Neverwinter Nights. But the game series it reminds me of the most is what I'm going to cover next. The only reason why I have not played this game in so many years is the fact that it was only playable on my old Windows XP laptop. I don't think I was ever able to get this running on my Windows Vista laptop, at least with the original disc version, so I just kind of gave up on it after a while. And when I got my first Xbox, I was pleased to see that these games are still offered in its backwards compatibility list. I've seen Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2 regarded as some of the best Star Wars games ever created. And I think the draw for me initially was the fact that this had nothing to do with anything current in Star Wars. All new locations, new characters, and a different storyline from years in the past, that was definitely something that was needed with the endless amount of games coming out, focusing on just that small time frame that the movies covered. Adding into the excellent writing and story that is offered in these games is that famous BioWare role-playing game engine, which is where most of your enjoyment of gameplay is going to come from. I remember my initial playthrough of this game being fraught with what do I do next, where do I go, and how do I do this, but when playing through it on this console, I don't know if it's just because I've matured as a gamer myself, or my memory is working better than I thought, I didn't really have that experience this time. Honestly, I don't know what else I could say that other people haven't already said 1,000 times. If you're a fan of Star Wars, you need to play this game. If you're a fan of BioWare's RPGs of the late 90s and early 2000s, this is a must-have. This is honestly, I think, the game that I'm looking forward to the most playing through out of this backwards compatibility list. Psychonauts is a title that has actually gained more prominence in recent years than it did when it first came out, as this game was a commercial failure on its initial release. It led to a severe financial loss for publisher Majesco, and eventually their departure from the video game market. However, this game was well received by those who played it and by critics, and has since gained a cult following, being considered one of the greatest video games ever made. And thankfully this title was kept alive by being included in the backwards compatibility list for OG Xbox titles, and as of the making of this video is available on Game Pass. The development studio Double Fine kept this game alive by republishing it for modern platforms, and sold the game through digital distribution. While it only sold around 100,000 copies on its initial release, it had sold up to 1.7 million as of December 2015. It was also during that time that they announced they would be making a full-fledged sequel that is also available on the Series X and available on Game Pass, and I'm very much looking forward to trying that. But since I had never played the original game, I decided to go back and give it a try, and man, this game is actually really good. They really nailed down the 3D platforming formula very early in this game, and when you add in the incredibly detailed world and rich environments that this game has, it is definitely fun to play through. I immediately recognized Tim Schafer's name because he had made a whole bunch of other games that I got sucked into, such as The Secret of Monkey Island, Day of the Tentacle, and Grim Fandango. And while this game is not done in the traditional point-and-click adventure style that those games are in, I think the whole theme and the concept of this game is just really well done and will suck you in. I would definitely recommend giving this game a try if you haven't, and I'll have to let you know if the sequel lives up to the hype once I've played it. And honestly, I could spend a lot more time going through each individual game, but if I had to say something overall, I didn't really find a game that I didn't enjoy playing on this list. I will note that some of these titles are available on Game Pass, and thus you wouldn't need to actually have a physical copy of the game in order to play it on your Xbox Series X, and you would even be able to play these on your Xbox Series S. For me personally, some of the games that I would consider essential to have that are backwards compatible are left off of Game Pass. So if you want to play any of those Star Wars games, you'll have to either purchase a digital edition or have the original disc. But overall, I was very impressed by the quality of titles. I don't think that they've narrowed down their entire Xbox library to these being the best, but out of the ones that are available, there's really not a bad one in the bunch. I think the one I would criticize the most is Fusion Frenzy, just because that game is multiplayer only. There's no reason to play it by yourself. Games like Red Faction 2 were a dime a dozen back in the day, offering somewhat of a typical first-person shooter experience, but is one that I enjoy going back to. Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb is also another one I liked going back to, as I don't think I ever played fully through this game, and it kind of plays like Tomb Raider in terms of its puzzles and action platforming you have to perform in this game. Other games, such as Grabbed by the Ghoulies, were available in a compilation titled Rare Replay, so there's not really a reason why, if you own that game, you would have to get an original copy to have backwards compatible on your system. But I think one of the bigger draws will be the fact that a lot of these games can still be played in multiplayer mode on Xbox Live. And I believe that jumps cross-platform between the Xbox One and the Xbox Series line of systems. In fact, I've seen others demonstrate that System Link still works between all 4 generations of Xbox with the game Crimson Skies. That is crazy to me to think that you can actually have that kind of backwards compatibility experience to where you can hook up your original Xbox and your Xbox Series console and play the same game between them. But in all honesty, I don't really see a lot of value to that. I just think it's neat that you can do that. So there you have it. That's a look at the original Xbox backwards compatibility with the Xbox Series X console. If you see there are games that are missing out of my collection that should be collected for backwards compatibility, let me know in the comments below. Also let me know in the future what you would like to see if I did a video on Xbox 360 backwards compatibility on the Xbox Series X. Remember, if you like what you see, please remember to give this video a thumbs up on your way out. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.